Hello, and welcome back to JC's Writing Advice. I'm JC Bybee, indie author, writer coach, and part-time YouTuber. I have 10 books that I've published. You can find my books and my author services or author coaching services at my website, jcbybee.com. You can also go to Patreon and support me. Both of those will be linked down below in the description. Today's video is continuing the What Happens When series. And my focus today is what happens when you're lacking conflict in your story. Conflict. This is something that if you are a fan of or have watched any of the podcast episodes of third-person POV, you learn that this is something I struggle with in the interpersonal, but we'll get to that. So, what is conflict? What do I mean when I say conflict? What I mean is any interaction between a person, a place, a thing, when your characters are interacting in such a way that things don't always go their way, things don't always go smoothly for them. I've broken it down into the following. Internal conflict, that is man versus self. When something inside of you is making things difficult. I'm going to break all of these down as we go along. External conflict, something outside of you is causing, and I want to say conflict because I'm going to say it a whole bunch. Something outside of you is getting in the way of what you're going for, your character's goals. Interpersonal conflict is conflict that exists in between people. And usually this is focused on friend groups, social groups, and how they deal with the interpersonal conflict that just arises between people. Then you have ideological conflict and large-scale conflict. Those tend to be broken down like this. They tend to be bigger picture. You'll find that a lot of these have similar ideas behind them. So we'll talk about it as we go along. So internal conflict, like I said, man versus self. And this arises from religious beliefs, cultural norms, personal code, expectations. What does your character believe about the world? And when those beliefs are challenged, how do they handle it? My character, Ace, is, as I've said before, essentially the equivalent of Superman. She is immensely powerful. She has a very strict personal code that she tries to follow. At the same time, she has things that arise that occasionally test that code. Situations that come up where she has to make a decision between her beliefs and sometimes even the law. Religious beliefs is one that shows up a lot. It can be very cliche and overdone because lots of reasons. But if your character has deeply held religious beliefs and they get challenged, that can lead to good storytelling depending on how you handle it. Cultural norms is another one. It's one that people get bent out of shape about when talking about, but cultural norms are important to your character and your world, whatever world that you've created, whether it's a Earth-like, whether it's a completely different world. How do the different cultures of these worlds interact, and how do those beliefs conflict with one another? And this sounds more large scale, but when somebody from one culture encounters a person from another culture and their beliefs are different, their cultural norms are different, how do they deal with it? Think about somebody that was born and raised in the United States and somebody that was born and raised in Japan or China or North or South Korea. I use those because They're examples that I'm a little bit more familiar with, and they tend to have some cultural norms that are different than what we who are raised in the United States expect, or are used to, rather. And how do we deal with them when we encounter them? Because these cultural norms shape who we are as people. And so you have to be able to, and this all will also bleed over into external and interpersonal conflicts. But how does your character handle having their cultural norms challenged? And does it shake them? That's the kind of conflict that is the character level conflict. A lot of these first few topics are character level conflicts. We'll get into the larger scales as we go along, like I said. And then expectations is interesting because you can look at the expectations as things that are put on the character, but also how they interpret the expectations that are placed upon them. And this is things like gender norms, and again, it fits in the cultural norms idea. In your society, what is the role of men? What is the role of women? What is the role of husbands, wives, fathers, mothers, children? And how does your character interpret those expectations? Because a misinterpretation or a overemphasis on cultural norms and expectations or religious expectations can lead to internal conflicts. And then you have external conflict, man versus other. Again, it arises from religion, family, society, work, and again, expectations. So what happens when these things challenge your characters? Is your character's belief challenged by religion, or are their religious beliefs challenged by another religious order or another set of religious beliefs, or a different interpretation of the religious beliefs that they've been raised upon? Family. Do they get along with their family? It's a big theme in certain cultures of, do I follow the family tradition? Do I follow the family expectations? And how does that shape the person? Then there's the societal expectations, societal pressures, societal conflicts that show up. And how does your character view them? How do they interact with them? How do they accept them or reject them? This is how you can put conflict in at various levels. Interpersonal or internal conflict is how you get your character hopefully motivated. External conflict is the problems that they run on along the way. And expectations are a big part of external conflicts. What kind of expectations are you going to put on your character, and how do they deal with those? Are some of them fine and the things that they're okay with? Or maybe the things that they thought they were handling, they really aren't. Can add an extra layer to your character. And character conflict helps drive story conflict. We're going to start getting into larger scale conflicts that can start driving the narrative a little bit more. Interpersonal conflicts, man versus man. So it arises from friends, family, coworkers, bosses, rivals, other people. And sometimes it's other people's needs interacting with what your main character views as what is important. Do they help their best friend when everything's on the line? Do they help their family when everything's on the line? How do they deal with these interpersonal conflicts? How do they deal with it when their family says, we have to have this from you. You have to do this. We need you to do this. But you don't want to do it. Or you want to do it different. Or all kinds of things. Coworkers is one that shows up a lot. I try to use it. I'm not as good with it. These first few are ones I struggle with. I'm not as good at putting in the the low-level conflicts, the interpersonal especially. My characters just get along too well. And that's a flaw in my writing that I'm trying to work on. And this last critique session that we went through with third-person POV, we talked about how to address some of the interpersonal conflict that I was going for but didn't quite convey. And one of the things that I want to point out and I want to emphasize, and I emphasize it because I'm trying to remember it for myself, trying to help myself. Sometimes we don't like being mean to our characters. My wife gave me a reframe for this. You aren't being mean to your characters. You are providing them with opportunities to grow. I lift weights. I enjoy lifting weights. If you want to get stronger, you have to put more weight and more reps. You have to vary your reps and vary your weight in order to get stronger. If you don't follow a logical program that follows training methodologies that have worked over time, you're not going to get the results you want. You might get some, but you're not going to get good results. And it's the same with conflict for your characters, especially interpersonal conflicts. If you want a good and interesting story, there has to be conflict to push your characters to grow. They have to encounter situations where they have to be challenged, and they're either going to change or stick to their guns, and why. That makes for an interesting story. That's what draws people in, is the interpersonal conflicts. How they deal with other people, how they deal with societal expectations, how they deal with their own expectations. How do they deal with it when everything they know or something they thought they believed and held strong gets shaken? And I've seen this done well in some stories. I've seen this done poorly in some stories. I will reference the Wheel of Time because that is my go-to. But in the beginning of the Wheel of Time, Rand has a personal belief shaken badly. And it sits with him for the entire first book and then some. And it takes a long time for him to come to terms with it. And it's a major driving force for him as he goes through the changes of book one, and how does he view himself, because he suddenly feels like he's a man without a home, a man without a people. And for somebody that's 18, 19 years old, that's hard. So these kind of revelations, these kind of conflicts make for interesting storytelling. And I have to remind myself, I say this as a reminder to myself, that that's something I need to do. Now we're getting into the big ones. You have ideological conflict, man versus beliefs. This can arise from religion, culture, government. These are getting into the larger conflicts versus, organizations, corporations, religions, countries, and how does your main character fit into the conflict, the overarching conflict of the story? And if you don't know how your character fits into the overarching conflict of the story, you need to figure that out, because there's a reason we're following this character. People always talk about, you hear people complain about movies, in movies, well, why does this person always run into the action? Why is the action always following this person? Because they're the main character. If we were watching a movie that was somebody watching the events of Godzilla happen on their TV, and the whole movie was just us watching somebody watching TV, that would be mind-numbingly boring. So your main character needs to fit into the overarching conflict of the story. And you need to have them fit in a way that makes sense. And maybe that arises from some of the previous topics we were talking about when it comes to conflict. Again, it's a cliche, it's a trope, it's overdone quite often, but religion is one that people use all the time and difficulties with religion. If you want to do that, great. Just remember, people are getting tired of the same old story. And religious conflict is not new. And unless you do it right, it's also not interesting. Cultural conflicts can become interesting. Cultural and religious conflicts together can become interesting. So pick your battles, as it were. And last but not least, you have large-scale conflict, man versus the world. This is more for epic fantasy and sometimes even sci-fi. These are the big stakes. The big problem, the big idea of what is going on, and these arise from everything we've been talking about. We don't need to reiterate it. Like I said, just study history, and you can see these kind of things. And I mean, really study history. Look at the events, not sanitized by an internet search, but actually look at what drives certain events and how things came about. In that way, when you write them, you have a better grasp on why you want the story to progress the way you want to progress, and how your main characters, whatever you, fit into this overarching narrative. The Chosen One trope is used a lot for a reason, because it makes a simple way to get your main character into the story. It helps us understand why a farm boy from the middle of nowhere suddenly is important. And it's because they have the opportunity to change the world. All right. That's going to wrap that up for today. I appreciate you stopping by. Thanks for giving this a listen. I will hopefully have another video talking about this. Maybe not. I feel like I've covered it fairly well. But if you have questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. You can also go to my website and my Patreon to support me. And if you like what you've heard, please like, share, subscribe, feed the algorithm beast, as it were. And I appreciate you for stopping by, and I hope you have an awesome day.